I remember shouting those words at John. How could you do this to me? It feels as though it happened just yesterday, even though more than a year has passed. At the time, I was 6 months pregnant, standing in the doorway of our living room, trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. He stood there, arms folded, his face completely emotionless, as if I were the one causing an issue. That moment marked the beginning of the realization that everything I had believed we had built together was nothing but a lie. My name is Melissa Harper, and I'm 32 years old now. I'm a single mother to my beautiful daughter, Emma, who is now 1 year old. Life has turned out much differently than I had imagined, but in some ways, it's even better. Just over a year ago, I was blindsided by betrayal that flipped my world upside down, forcing me to figure out how to move forward while preparing to bring my baby girl into the world. In the early weeks after John left, I felt like I was drowning. Every time I closed my eyes, his face and the sound of his cruel words haunted me. I'm not attracted to you anymore, Melissa. Look at you. You've let yourself go. His words echoed in my mind, cutting deeper every time I thought about them. And Julia? My so-called best friend? She couldn't even bring herself to face me. I never confronted her. I didn't see the point. Instead, I just erased her from my life like she never existed. I struggled through the rest of my pregnancy alone, both emotionally and financially. John hadn't just walked out on me, he abandoned Emma too. Not a single text, not a penny in support. My mom did her best to be there for me, but I could tell it tore her up to see me like that. I put on a brave face for everyone else, but at night, when the house was silent, I would cry until exhaustion forced me to sleep. It all began when my friend Karen showed up at my door. She looked pale and uneasy, and I could instantly tell something was wrong. "Melissa, I need to talk to you," she said as she stepped inside. She paused, as if trying to figure out how to begin. "I saw John today, with Julia. They were coming out of a hotel together, and they kissed. Right there in the hallway." My heart sank. For a brief moment, I couldn't make sense of what she was saying. John? My husband? And Julia? My best friend? My heart pounded as anger flooded me, and I bombarded Karen with questions. Where? When? Are you sure? But deep down, I knew she wouldn't lie about something like this. Still, I couldn't help myself from asking again, "What do you mean? A hotel? Why would you be at a hotel? Are you sure? This is a serious accusation." My voice trembled, hoping for some kind of explanation that would make everything disappear. Karen nodded solemnly, her eyes full of pity and regret. "My cousins were staying at that hotel. I was on my way to their room when I saw them. They didn't notice me, but I saw them coming out of a room together. They kissed right there in the hallway." She paused, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry, but you needed to know." Hearing her confirm it, so matter-of-factly, was like a punch to my gut. My chest tightened, and tears welled up in my eyes as the reality of the situation began to settle in. I sank onto the couch, gasping for breath. My world was crumbling right in front of me. The man I trusted, the man I thought I was building a future with, had been sneaking around with my best friend. And Julia? She had been part of my life for years, someone I leaned on in tough times. How could they do this to me, especially now, when I was carrying our child? I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all tangled up in a knot I couldn't untangle. Every memory, every promise, every plan we had shared suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't stop wondering if I had been blind. Was there something I missed, or had I been so easy to discard? The weight of it all crushed me, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I was breaking. That night, I waited for John to come home, my stomach twisted in knots, my heart racing. When I heard his car in the driveway, both anger and dread surged through me. He walked in as though nothing was wrong, casually setting his keys on the counter and loosening his tie. I didn't even let him get past the kitchen. "How long has it been, John?" I asked, my voice shaking but steady. He looked up, confusion clouding his face, before his expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play games with me," I snapped. "Karen saw you at the hotel, with Julia." Now tell me the truth. His face twisted into a scowl, and he scoffed. Karen? That woman's crazy. She probably misunderstood something. Melissa, you're letting your imagination run wild. There's nothing going on. But his defensive tone, combined with his refusal to meet my eyes, told me everything I needed to know. I tightened my fists, feeling the heat of anger rise with every word he spoke. Don't you dare lie to me, John, I yelled, my voice faltering. Karen's not crazy, and you know it. She saw you, with Julia, leaving that hotel room. She saw you kiss her. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence. He threw his hands up, frustration written all over his face, pacing the room like he was the one wronged. Melissa, you're overreacting, he snapped. Karen probably misunderstood, twisted things in her head. Julia and I are just friends. That's it. But his excuses were weak, and with every word, I saw the guilt etched across his face. It was clear he was only digging himself deeper, trying to get out of the hole he had already created. As he rambled on, I suddenly felt something stir inside me. Emma. She moved, as if to remind me that she was there, that I was carrying a tiny life in the midst of this chaos. For a brief moment, the anger faded, replaced by a wave of sadness so intense that it nearly knocked the breath out of me. How could he do this to us? To her? I instinctively placed my hand on my belly, trying to steady myself. Do you even care about us, John? I asked, my voice softer now, tinged with heartbreak. Do you care about your daughter? She's in here, feeling all of this, feeling me fall apart because of you. His gaze briefly flickered to my belly, but instead of softening, his expression remained cold and distant. This isn't about the baby, he said flatly. Don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be. That was the moment I knew the truth. I was truly on my own. I felt tears start to form, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. More dramatic? I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. I'm 6 months pregnant, John. 6 months. And you're telling me it's not dramatic that you've been sneaking around with my best friend? You've destroyed our family before our daughter even had a chance to be born. With every word, my voice grew louder, my heartbreak turning into a searing rage that I couldn't hold back anymore. John sighed as if he were the one being inconvenienced. Melissa, you're blowing this way out of proportion, he said, shaking his head. Julia and it just happened, okay? I can't control how I feel. Things haven't been right between us for a while now. And honestly, look at you. You've changed. He motioned toward me, his words dripping with contempt. I'm not attracted to you anymore, Melissa. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. John scoffed and shook his head like I was wasting his time. God, Melissa, do you even hear yourself? He snapped, his voice icy. You've been nothing but a whiny, overgrown baby ever since you got pregnant. Every day it's something. Your back hurts, your feet are swollen, you're tired. I get it, you're pregnant, but you're acting like you're the first woman in the world to have a baby. It's pathetic. He looked me up and down, his face contorted with disgust. And don't even get me started on how you look, he sneered, his voice dropping to a cruel tone. You're huge. Honestly, Melissa, you're starting to look like a damn elephant waddling around here. It's embarrassing. You don't even try to look decent anymore. It's just sweatpants and your greasy hair tied up in that ugly bun. Julia? He continued, as if I hadn't even spoken. She's gorgeous. She actually takes care of herself, and she's fun to be around. You? You're just a moody, needy mess, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. His words hung in the air like poison, and I stood frozen, unable to respond. How could he be so cruel? I had prepared myself for the lies and excuses, but this was something I couldn't have expected. The man I had once trusted, the man who had promised to love me, was now standing before me, tearing me apart. It wasn't enough that he had betrayed me, torn apart our marriage and our family for my best friend. Now he was humiliating me, stripping away every ounce of dignity I had left. My throat tightened, and though I felt tears welling in my eyes, I refused to let them fall in front of him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. You don't even care, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Not about me. Not about Emma. Not about anything we had together. John simply shrugged, his face expressionless. I've moved on, Melissa, he said flatly. Maybe you should too. His words hit me like a slap, and in that moment, I realized the man I had once loved was gone. The next day, I packed what I could fit into a few suitcases and left. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of him, of us, and the walls felt as if they were closing in on me. My mom had offered weeks ago to let me stay with her if I ever needed support during the pregnancy, and now I had no choice but to accept her offer. When I arrived at her house, she was waiting at the door, her arms open wide, her face etched with worry. I gently pulled Melissa into a hug, speaking softly, "Oh, sweetheart." The moment I felt her arms around me, I broke down completely, sobbing like a child into her shoulder. It was the first time since Karen had told me the truth that I allowed myself to cry. "It's going to be okay, Melissa," she whispered, holding me close. "You and Emma will be okay. I'm here, and we will get through this together." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of safety. I was broken, but I was safe. The days I spent at my mom's house were quieter, though they didn't feel any easier. She did everything she could to lift my spirits, making my favorite meals, sitting with me in the evenings, and keeping our conversations focused on everything except John. But when she wasn't around, the silence was deafening. I would spend hours staring at the nursery items I had brought with me, folding and refolding Emma's tiny clothes, lost in thought about how I was going to handle everything alone. Occasionally, I found myself picking up my phone, almost instinctively, tempted to call John. I wanted to scream at him, demand to know how he could just walk away from us without a second thought. But every time, I stopped myself. What would be the point? He had already shown me who he truly was, what he valued, and it wasn't me or our daughter. Instead, I forced myself to focus on Emma, reminding myself that she was the reason I had to remain strong. For her sake, I couldn't let him destroy me. As the weeks passed, it seemed as though John had vanished from my life completely. No calls, no texts, no inquiries about the baby, nothing. It was as though we had never existed to him. At first, I checked my phone obsessively, part of me hoping, part of me dreading, that he might finally reach out. But there was no message. Eventually, I stopped looking at my phone altogether. It was easier that way. No reminders, no false hope, just silence. Oddly enough, it felt like John had become a ghost. The man who had been a constant in my life for so long now felt like a distant memory. When I moved into my mom's house, I packed away every photo of him, every trace of him from my past, and shoved them into a box that I buried at the back of my closet. Sometimes, when I thought about him, it wasn't out of longing, but in disbelief. How could someone just disappear from their child's life before it had even begun? John felt like he never existed, yet his absence was so loud it echoed through every moment I had to face on my own. As the months went on, each one seemed harder than the last. Pregnancy took its toll on me. I was constantly drained, and the weight of doing everything by myself became overwhelming. My mom was a lifesaver, but there were still nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I had ended up in this situation. The thought of bringing Emma into the world without her father, without the life I had once envisioned for her, weighed heavily on me. But every time I felt her move, I was reminded that she was the reason I had to keep going. She was the only good thing that had come out of this mess. When Emma was finally born, she was perfect. The moment I held her for the first time, with her tiny fingers gripping mine, I was overwhelmed with love. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. It didn't matter that John wasn't there, that he had chosen to walk away. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was Emma, and she was mine. My beautiful, precious little girl. She was worth every tear, every sleepless night, and every bit of pain. The first few weeks with Emma were a blur. Between late-night feedings and learning how to be a mom, there was barely time to think about anything else. Emma had the most stunning eyes, big and bright, full of wonder. And when she looked at me, it felt like everything might just be okay. My mom was a huge help, but I made sure to do as much as I could on my own. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to John, though he was long gone, that I could do this without him. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. I'd see fathers showering their kids with affection in the grocery store or hear friends talk about their partners helping with nighttime feedings, and it stung. But then I'd look at Emma, and all the sadness would fade away. She was my world now, and every smile she gave me, every little coo, made everything worth it. I didn't need John to be happy. I had everything I needed right there in my arms. Weeks later, as life with Emma started to feel more manageable, I decided to take a trip to the mall. My mom offered to watch Emma for a few hours so I could have some time to myself, something I hadn't had since before she was born. It felt odd leaving the house without her, but I knew I needed a break. Just walking through the brightly lit halls, surrounded by people going about their day-to-day lives, reminded me that the world hadn't stopped turning even though mine had. I wandered aimlessly for a while, stopping in a few baby stores to pick out a couple of outfits for Emma. I was starting to feel a sense of normalcy when suddenly I heard someone call my name. Melissa? I turned around and my heart skipped a beat. There she was, Julia. She looked so different, her complexion pale and her eyes swollen and red, showing the signs of distress. The subtle bulge of her stomach was also unmistakable. Before I could gather my thoughts, she rushed toward me, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Melissa, I am so sorry," she said, her tears flowing freely as she grasped my arm. I froze in place, caught completely off guard. Julia, the woman who had torn my life apart, stood in front of me, weeping like a child. She no longer resembled the confident, manipulative person I remembered. Her posture was slumped, her clothes wrinkled, and her hands shook as she wiped away her tears. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she sobbed, her voice a jumble of emotions, "but I need to tell you everything." I remained silent, unable to speak, my heart racing in my chest as I waited for her to continue. "John left me," she choked out. "A few months after we got together, he lost his job. Everything went downhill from there. He started gambling, drinking, and when I told him I was pregnant, he just walked away. He said he couldn't handle it." She covered her face with her hands, her body trembling with sobs. "I don't know what to do, Melissa. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Right there, in the middle of the mall, she broke down. Passers-by glanced our way, but I barely noticed. I couldn't move. I was frozen, just staring at her as a whirlwind of emotions surged inside me. Julia continued to sob, her voice breaking, her plea reaching me. "Please, Melissa, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to forgive me. I was selfish and foolish. I ruined everything. I wish I could undo all of it. Please, I'm begging you." Her words lingered in the air, but I couldn't respond. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and an odd sense of satisfaction. For so long, I had dreamed of a moment like this, where she would realize the pain she caused and beg for my forgiveness. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing. Not even the satisfaction I had imagined. I looked at her once more, her face streaked with tears, and without saying another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone in the middle of the mall. When I arrived home, still reeling from the surreal encounter, another surprise awaited me. Sitting on the front steps was John, hunched over, looking like a man who had lost everything. At first, I thought I was seeing things. He looked so different, unkempt, weary, and reeking of alcohol. His hair was a mess, his clothes disheveled, and he barely resembled the man I once knew. He lifted his head as I approached, his eyes bloodshot and glazed. "Melissa," he mumbled, struggling to stand. I needed to see you." I froze. Anger surged within me, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe he was here, after everything he had done. The audacity to show up on my doorstep, in this state. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp, filled with cold disbelief. He swayed slightly, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I love you, Melissa. I love Emma. Please, let me come back. I swear, I'll fix everything. His voice cracked, but all I felt was disgust and an overwhelming clarity. The stench of alcohol hit me before I even had a chance to respond. Sorry, I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. You're sorry? You left me, you left us, without a second thought. And now you show up, smelling like a bar, talking about being sorry and loving us? John ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of the world was on him. I know, Melissa, he said, his voice breaking. I know I've messed up. I've lost everything, you, Emma, my job, my money. I've been an idiot, and now I can't stop thinking about everything I've thrown away. I love you. I love Emma. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. I stared at him for a moment, feeling a chaotic storm of anger, pity, and something else I couldn't quite identify. This man, the one I once built my world around, the father of my child, was now nothing more than a broken shell. You love us, I said, my voice trembling. Where was that love when I was 6 months pregnant and you just walked away? Where was it when Emma was born and I was in the hospital alone? You abandoned us, John. You don't get to come here now and act like the victim. He leaned on the doorframe, his body trembling as tears welled in his bloodshot eyes. I know, he whispered. I don't deserve anything from you. But I've changed, Melissa. I can change. Please, just let me be part of Emma's life. I'll do anything. I felt a lump in my throat as I watched him unravel, falling apart before me. A small part of me wanted to believe him, to reach out and comfort the man I once loved so deeply. But the memories of all the nights I spent crying, wondering how I would manage on my own, kept me grounded. As I looked at him, a lump formed in my throat, but I quickly pushed the feelings aside. The memories of everything he had put me through, every lonely night, every tear shed, kept me from letting any emotions cloud my judgment. I finally said, my voice firm but filled with emotion, No, John, you're no longer a part of my life. Emma and I are better off without you. You made your decision, and now you must live with it. He collapsed in front of me, his sobs soft yet painfully raw. For just a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. However, I quickly reminded myself that I needed to remain strong for both my sake and Emma's. Without another word, I stepped around him, unlocked the door, and quietly closed it behind me, leaving him alone in the darkness. Inside, I leaned against the door, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle in. In a single day, both John and Julia, two people who had nearly destroyed my life, had shown up, broken by their own choices. I didn't need to do anything to bring about their downfall. They had wrecked themselves, consumed by the same selfishness and deceit that had torn my world apart over a year ago. I thought back to the painful memories, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the endless nights where I wondered how I would manage to raise Emma alone. But through all of that, I had carried myself with dignity, focused solely on my daughter, and worked tirelessly to rebuild my own sense of self-worth. And now, here I stood, strong and resolute, while those who had once broken me were left to face the consequences of their actions. I quietly made my way up the stairs and peeked into Emma's room. She was sound asleep, her face calm and serene in the gentle light of the night. I bent down to kiss her forehead, feeling a surge of love and gratitude wash over me. This was my life now, and it was going to be beautiful. Hey, did you enjoy the story? If so, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and ensures you'll never miss out on any of the amazing stories we share. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.